So today we're going to be talking about mutualism, which is the relationship between two organisms where both benefit from the relationship. It's important to remember when talking about mutualism that mutualism is not the same thing as symbiosis. Symbiosis is a term that encompasses all of the species interactions that we've been talking about so far. Mutualism, parasitism, predation, competition, those all fall under the umbrella term of symbiosis, where mutualism is the specific type of symbiotic relationship where both parties are benefiting. It's also important to talk about obligate versus facultative mutualisms. Obligate mutualisms are one where one or both organisms need the other one in order to survive. Facultative mutualisms are one where one or both organisms don't necessarily need the other one in order to survive, but the chances of survival greatly increase by being in this mutualistic relationship. So an example of this is coral and zooxanthellae. Coral need zooxanthellae in order to survive. Without them, they won't survive at all. While the zooxanthellae don't need to inhabit coral in order to survive, but their chances of survival greatly increase when they have a coral host. It's also important to talk about commensalism when talking about mutualism. Commensalism is a type of interaction where one party benefits and the other one does not benefit but doesn't suffer any cost either. This usually comes through organisms using another one for shelter or for structure, but it's really hard to quantify these relationships because sometimes it's hard to tell if one organism is actually getting a neutral effect out of the relationship instead of being harmed or instead of benefiting. There are 4 Locke-Volterra models for mutualistic relationships. The first one's a runaway facultative scenario where neither species needs the other one in order to survive. So this is an example with a fish and an anemone. At the y-intercept, where you have no anemones, you still have a fish population, and vice versa for the anemone when there are no clownfish. But when both are existing, both populations will continue to grow as the other one grows in a mutualistic relationship. The next model is the stable facultative model, again using the clownfish and anemone as an example. So at this point, they'll move towards a stable equilibrium point, and if they go above that stable equilibrium, both populations will decline until they go back to that equilibrium. And as both populations decline, they'll move back upwards towards the equilibrium point, and it's a stable equilibrium. They'll continue to stay there. The third scenario, we've moved to obligate mutualistic relationships, and this is the collapsing relationship where at the y-intercept, where there are no anemones, the population or the carrying capacity for clownfish is actually 0, vice versa with the anemones. So this just proves that the clownfish, if they were an obligate mutualist, need the anemones in order to survive, and vice versa. And as the clownfish population grows, whatever the first positive value that you reach for the y-axis, that would be the number of anemones needed to keep the clownfish population surviving. And the last model is the unstable obligate system, which is really similar to the second scenario that we went over, the stable facultative, except that the vectors have flipped. So in this case, this equilibrium point is unstable, and the populations will actually move away from it, so they'll either grow to infinity or decline to negative infinity.